Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today for Animation Nation, Finding Hope After Loss in Children's Media. I'm Michelle Sugihara, Executive Director of CAPE, the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment, where we focus on changing representation from the writer's room to the boardroom, ultimately affecting what you watch in your living room. 2020 has been a challenging year in so many ways, but it has also heightened the resiliency and generosity of the human spirit. As the world turned to media for solace, for education, and for entertainment, perhaps for the first time in such a concentrated way, we are reminded of the power and responsibility of media. Research has shown that storytelling can actually change the brain, which is why we are so excited to partner with the Center for Scholars and Storytellers and Pearl Studio, the powerhouse behind the animated hits Abominable and Over the Moon, for today's program. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Yalda T Wills, the founding director of the Center for Scholars and Storytellers. Welcome, Dr. Wills.
Thank you so much. And thank you for adding my T, Yalda T Wills. I appreciate that. We are so honored and pleased to partner with you. And we are very, very excited to present this show. Just a brief about Center for Scholars and Storytellers. We are based at UCLA, and we bridge the world of academia with scholars and content creators. We're very invested in many of the conversations that we'll be having today. I was just saying one of our top blog posts that's research oriented, but also very a personal story is about representation in Asian media. And we'll drop that in the chat in the Facebook Live. And we also have a COVID tip sheet we just released that's targeted to talking about these kind of topics in content to kids. So we are really, really pleased to have this incredible opportunity to partner with CAPE, to partner with Pearl Studios. Wow, what a powerhouse. And to partner with George Wang, who I will introduce in 1 minute, and also Dr. Bridget Callahan, who is a wonderful professor at UCLA in the Child Development Department. So George Wang is, it's my pleasure to introduce George Wang, who is a professor at UCLA Film School. He's also a collaborator of the Center for Scholars and Storytellers. And George and I both started our careers out at Sony. He was an assistant. I was a creative executive. And he went off to do movies, and I went off to be an executive. And then somehow we both magically ended back at UCLA. So take it away, George.
Thanks for having me, Alda. Yeah, it's sort of, we can't shake that sort of assistant executive relationship. She told me to be here. I said, yes, sir. But anyways, no, it is a distinct pleasure to be here, being a member of CAPE and both contributor to Center for Scholars and Storytellers. Yeah, I'm really proud to be here, even though, Michelle, I'm afraid my dues may have lapsed, so I will cut you a check after this is all over. But welcome tonight to Animation Nation, where we will be discussing finding hope after loss in children's media. And tonight we have two, really great guest speakers who are going to be talking to us about that. First up is Dr. Bridget Callahan, who is an assistant professor of psychology at UCLA, and she studies how early life experiences can influence interactions between mental, and I should probably turn that off. Sorry. Really, I'm good at this moderating thing. Oh God, y'all just gonna kill me. Anyways, so Dr. Callahan studies how early life experiences can influence interactions between mental and physical health across development. Also joining us tonight is Justinian Huang, who is the head of development at Pearl Studios. Even though we have the same last name, you're not related, as far as I know. So, I think we might be having some issues with your audio, Justinian. Sorry. A second. Okay. We'll see if we can sort it out as we go. But so Justinian is the head of development at Pearl Studios, and at Pearl, Justinian leads a team that oversaw the historic co-production of not only Kung Fu Panda 3, but of last year's holiday hit, Abominable, ooh, that was a mouthful, and also the most recent Netflix hit, Over the Moon. So welcome, Justinian. Welcome, Dr. Callahan. Let's start with you, Dr. Callahan. Why don't you tell us your story? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into psychology, and particularly the field of psychology and child development.
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, thanks for having me. This is a really fun opportunity. I've been in psychology for many, many years now. I started off my career really trying to look at child development and all of its complexity. And so I've been really interested in trying to understand how parent-child relationships in particular, and the types of experiences that children have early in life, particularly tough and difficult experiences, how they influence children's functioning across the lifespan. So I work with kids from 2 years of age all the way to 18 years of age and their parents, and I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk about really these incredibly important issues, which is child functioning at the moment, and particularly in the time of COVID. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Okay, let's turn to you, Justinian. So yeah, how'd you get involved in movie making, entertainment business? What's a nice Chinese boy like you doing in a business like this? I think we're still having audio issues. Yeah. So let's take a minute to sort that out. While we're is with the AirPods. So I'm gonna try to shut the AirPods off and just go with your computer audio. Let's see, but there we go. Nice. Yeah. All right. Yeah. That works great. You're coming in loud.
A really good joke, and now I have to say it again.
That's all right.
It doesn't sound
Nobody
as funny
heard
as
it.
it's just to me. Come on. I said I said I'm finally around doctors, so my family can be very proud of me.
No, doctor. What's your professor at a college where they start calling you doctor for some reason? But Bridget,
I feel better. How did I get? The question was, how did I get into the movie business? So I actually wanted to be a doctor for most of my life, but OChem classes were at 7 a.m. in college, so I decided not to do it anymore. No, actually, ever since I was a kid, I wanted to work in movies. Always. It's true. Like I was a huge Wang Kar-wai freak when I was a kid. I just wanted to direct, the next In the Mood for Love, all of that stuff. And to be honest, like a lot of people, including my friends and family, they told me, oh, but why would you do that? Because Hollywood traditionally isn't open to people of Asian descent. So I didn't really listen to that, and I just started ditching classes in college, and worked for Linda Oakes, a great producer, legendary. She produced Interstellar, and through a lot of hard work, I had a very old school upbringing, basically, in Hollywood. Had coffee thrown at me a few times. It's all good. So and I was in Shanghai. I'm joking, not really.
Well, we can make about grief and loss and any trauma.
Exactly. So much trauma. I was in Shanghai on vacation 6 years ago. And just through mutual friends, someone reached out to me, asked me to have coffee. The person ended up being Joe Aguilar, who was head of what used to be called Oriental DreamWorks, very problematic name. And after we had coffee, he said, you should join. And I started working there as a creative exec, and now I'm head of development, which is crazy. So it's been an interesting 6 years for sure, definitely.
Nice, that's great.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's start talking about grief and loss in children's media. So, Bridget, you study a lot of the interaction between life experiences and mental health during child development. So. Given everything that's going on right now, with COVID, the pandemic, what do you think the long-term and short-term effects are going to be on on kids. And yeah, because I've got a 5 and 7-year-old upstairs, and I do not know what to do. So, you know.
Well, firstly, George, do not worry. I think, you know, this is new territory for everyone, and no one knows what to do at the moment. It's a really tough period of time. So it's, you know, it's tough for kids. It's tough for parents as well. And it's tough, therefore, for the entire family unit. So in terms of the, you know, short-term and long-term consequences, we know a little about the short-term consequences because, you know, we've all been living in COVID for a long time now, unfortunately. I remember when it started off, I thought that it would only be 2 weeks and then maybe only 6 weeks. And now we're, you know, more than 6 months into this, this crazy period of life. So we've done a little bit of work in my lab looking at some of the short-term consequences of COVID for family units. And one of my favorite studies that we've done so far is to actually just ask families to tell us in their own words how they're experiencing COVID. Now, this is not something, you know, I call myself a quantitative psychologist, which means I like to give surveys and get back like numbers. So this was a really interesting new endeavor for me to actually, you know, work with written passages of information, but it was so rich and I really loved hearing about all of the different experiences that parents and children were having. And, you know, a lot of it was really tough. Like kids were really struggling. Kids are really struggling at the moment. One of the things that kids said that they were struggling the most with was, you know, not being at school. And so not having those school social relationships. They weren't missing their math class so much, but they were definitely missing those school social relationships. And then for parents, you know, it's a struggle for those parents who are lucky enough to have maintained their job and to be working from home. You know, it's a struggle of trying to work and parent from home and the stresses that are associated with that. So we know there are short-term consequences. Unfortunately, now we don't know too much about the long-term consequences. And that's something that we'll have to explore as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you know, given the headlines and everything, you know, the tragic deaths that are going on, you know, there have been, you know, a parent of one of my son's classmates just passed away recently. So, you know, it's difficult, and, you know, especially at this age, how honest should we be as parents when discussing the reality of this pandemic and, you know, the reality of some of the traumas that are happening right now around the world. You know, how we have, you know, a healthy discussion about these issues without, you know, thinking, oh my God, I'm just scarring my children even more.
Yeah. It's a really important question. And I think, you know, one of the things we need to do as parents is not be afraid of having those conversations, because, you know, if your children are facing these events, which they absolutely are, we're all living through this together, they're going to have feelings about it. And whether we talk about it or not, those feelings aren't going to go away. Only through talking and discussing are we going to help our children to kind of resolve these feelings that they're having. So the first thing I would say is to definitely not shy away from conversations about COVID with children. And the first thing I would do is to just open up a really simple dialogue to try and understand what it is that your children are taking away from this experience. So what are their perceptions of COVID? What are their misperceptions of COVID? What are they afraid of? And, you know, within that, we might find that children are potentially making some, having some ideas that are not supported, that are not, you know, things that we can help them to correct. So misinformation that we can help correct. So there's many things that we can do beyond that. So like once we open up that conversation, once we're kind of correcting their understanding of things, we can then give them some concrete ways of moving forward. So we can firstly validate their feelings. So, you know, if they think that half the world is going to die, that's a really scary thing. So we can validate that, and then we can help correct that and provide reassurance. So reassurance coming from parents is really, really important. Yeah. So saying things, you know, like there are lots of adults who are working really hard all the time to try and get us a vaccine. There's a vaccine on the horizon. Those are important messages for children to hear from their parents. So yeah, I think parents really need to recognize what important, powerful emotion buffers they are for children. It can be really important.
So my approach of just basically, you know, slamming off the TV whenever the news is on with, like, you know, is not the right strategy, is what you're telling me.
So I mean, Children need to be presented information in ways that's appropriate for their age and stage of development. So, you know, it's possible that they shouldn't hear the information from the news, but they're definitely going to hear it from different places. So telling them the information in a way that you know, you're their parent, you know them best, a way that you know that they'll understand it. So using metaphor, for example, using, you know, for younger children who are not as abstract and can't represent things as well through talk and dialogue, you know, engaging with them through play and those sorts of things to help them explore those feelings in a constructive, actual concrete way.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So if you're just joining us, welcome to the live stream of Animation Nation. We're discussing finding hope after loss in children's media. We're going to turn now to Justinian, and let's talk about some of the work you do at Pearl. So, you know, you know, the world around us and, you know, all the trauma that's going on, you know, how do you creatively, you know, account for a lot of these issues when you're developing films for children?
Well, you know, before I started at Pearl, I never had worked in quote unquote children's media before. And when I started, you know, developing stuff, I didn't really change the way I developed things. I don't think just because you're talking to an audience that is potentially younger than, you know, the audiences that I used to directly make develop stuff for, I don't think that you should talk down to children. And I think that you can talk to them like they are complex, emotional people, as much as I would be telling a story to someone my own age. So I think that when you look at the slate that I've been working on, that my team has been working on, obviously we touch on the loss of parents with both Abominable and with Over the Moon, but we also touch on stuff that is complex and difficult. You know, we touch on bullying, we touch on gender identity. Some of our projects, you know, like I think it's just, first of all, I think that to be a good development executive, you just need to be incredibly aware of the world around you. And you need to, and when you're talking to, one thing that creating movies that are geared towards kids actually has that other forms of media don't have, is that you are sort of given this, you sort of have this obligation to impart messages that potentially can help this generation, this young generation, grow up to be better global citizens in a way, you know. So, you know, when me and my team, when we sit and we talk about ideas, for sure we obviously want to make content that's fun and, you know, inspiring and empowering and all of those things, but we're also thinking about, hey, like what sort of images, what sort of ideas, what sort of messages do we wish we'd gotten when we were kids, you know? I think about, you know, I think about, for instance, you know, like a personal note for Abominable, there was a character in that movie. His name is Jin. He's a young man. He plays opposite Yi, and he's sort of like, they sort of have this like very funny back and forth. He was we took our time formulating him because, you know, Asian American men in media are often portrayed in a certain way, like we're nerds, you know, and like, you know, or whatever. I don't need to go into all of that, but we wanted to portray something that was more true to what we see when we look at our nephews and our, you know, and also Asian men in other countries and also Asian men within our country. So we formulated him to be this very suave, sort of debonair. He's still really smart, but he's not a nerd pushing up his glasses all the time, you know, and he's actually kind of an arrogant asshole. So we sort of wanted to, it's creating that when you're creating, when, you know, the thing about Abominable was that it was the first time that Chinese teenagers were put on the world stage in animations. So we very much carefully thought about how we wanted to, formulate them. So that's just one example, you know, of how we sort of like we sort of apply what we see in the world into the characters and stories we develop.
That's great. So Bridget, so with your research and with your working in your studies, can you use storytelling as a tool? How effective is this as a tool when working with young children? Like you said, well, as a parent, you should just be honest, open with them, but presenting the truth as in a frame of a story, does that help get the points across? What advice would you have on that front? Or the things we should avoid?
I only have things that you can do, and I think we worry enough about what they shouldn't be doing that we should just focus on telling them the many wonderful things they can and probably are already doing. I'll start by saying, just hearing Justinian talk about the process that you will take it at Pearl is really interesting and inspiring. And I know for myself, when I watched Abominable and when I watched Over the Moon, I was really taken aback by how beautifully the psychological constructs of, loss and resilience and recovery were explored in those movies. I was definitely in tears for Over the Moon. By the end, I think it's just such a beautiful film. I think, I love that seems, based on what Justinian just said, it seems to have happened spontaneously or through these amazing conversations that you've all had. So you clearly have such a keen eye for the world. It was really nice to see. So in terms of like storytelling and parents and children, absolutely. Like story is such a wonderful way of children learning about things, and children love story and they love film, and you'll notice that children watch films again and again and again, the same film over and over again, because they get so much more from the story each and every time. Like you really grow up kind of learning through story, and most of the story is presented in film these days. So I would really strongly encourage families to use story to explore these difficult concepts with children. So you can take an approach where you incorporate that in many different ways. So if something has happened recently where there's been a death in the family, God forbid, or some other tragedy, speaking very plainly to children about it, so not hiding it, not trying to protect them from the harsh realities of life, but to try and present it to them in a way that's understandable to them, and then kind of following that up with media in different formats. So either story through book or story through film and other media is a really nice way of them to just kind of think through the ideas in a variety of different ways, and to see how the characters themselves are kind of adapting to their own life circumstances, and children can learn through seeing other people do things.
Yeah, when I was watching The Over Moon with my kids, and it is such a profoundly, it's a story of grief. But yeah, to try to explain to the kids and I can't believe you put this in the movie, just any the unbreakable chasm of sadness. It's like, oh my God, much merchandising for that. But again, it is a very profound way to express to my kids, like, it's okay to be sad. Well,
it's strange how the universe works that this movie came out during 2020, because like all films, we didn't set out, obviously we didn't know what was going to happen in 2020, and we also to give you a little background about that movie, so Janet Yang, it was very traditional the way it all came about. Janet Yang came to our studio in Shanghai, and she pitched this beautiful story about a girl who flies to the moon to meet this moon goddess, right? And we took it out to writers, and we ended up going with Audrey Wells, who the late Audrey Wells, who was a very dear friend of mine, and she pitched this beautiful take on it, because the question was, why does this little girl fly to the moon? Like, what would compel her to do that? And when Audrey said that it was because her mother, who passed away used to tell her this story about the moon goddess, and she associates with it, and which then makes the whole movie this metaphor about the stages of grief after, you know, losing someone. It was very, you know, I when I read the script for I read that first draft and I cried because it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever read, and I read scripts every day, you know. The thing about it is that, you know, I feel like the reason why it's really affected a lot of people is because the emotions behind it are very genuine. When Audrey was writing this, she was dying of cancer, and it was a love letter to her daughter, you know, to tell her daughter, you know, to find love after she passes, you know, and I feel like that rings very true, you know. So yeah, it's those emotions are real, you know, definitely. So like it was very, there was a poetry to it that it came out this year, when so many of us and so many people we care about have lost people that we love, and are also scared of that reality as well. Yeah.
Now, yeah, again, it's one of the more, you know, it's that image of, you know, is it the you know, the lead girl just curled up in the ball, vastness of like black space. It's more haunting images that I've seen this year on film. It really is. So yeah.
Thank you.
So again, if you're just joining us, this is the live stream of Animation Nation. We're looking at finding hope after loss in children's media. So here's a question. So you've done 2 movies now where you've got a significant parent who dies. Is this going to be for you?
So yes, we're rebranding ourselves the Dead Parent Society.
Okay.
That wasn't planned that would just happen that way. You know, it's interesting. It is a trope that, you know, and you look at all the classic Disney movies. Right. That, you know, kids, we have kids who lost one parent or are orphans and all of that. And I feel like the reason why that's such a common trope is because that is something that a lot of kids, that's something that development execs, to get inside baseball about it, that's something that we're like, those are stakes that kids can definitely understand. Right? Like, oh, what if mom or dad don't come home? You know, knock on wood. So it's definitely, we did not mean for that to happen that way. And by the way, the slate has no more past there. No, there's so much more to talk about, honestly. And like, you know, like I'm very fascinated by the issues of identity, the issues of bullying, the issues of, you know, like displacement, the issues of the other, like these are all these are all things that kids deal with every day in a very profound way, you know. So there's more to come. Yes, maybe slightly different subject matters.
To follow up on what Justinian said, I think you're so right, though, that those are stakes that children really understand. And that's why it's a trope. That's why there are so many different movies on this topic. And even for children who haven't experienced loss themselves, they think about it. Like, children think about what it would be like to not have their parents, because their parents are so critically important for their entire lives. They're so important. So it's, you know, it's maybe not going to be the entire catalogue of films there, but they're such important films to have, for sure, because children need to think about it and to explore those emotions.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, again, I think it is, again, like you said, Justinian, there's a long history, whether we go back to Grimm's fairy tales, you know, to any Pixar movie ever made. Yeah, it's always sort of the sudden tragic death of a parent. So, so just out of curiosity, Bridget, because, you know, I know your study really focuses on sort of, you know, physical symptoms exhibiting from, you know, these sort of mental traumas and stuff. Yeah. Should I be looking for anything particular in my boys that red flags? I'm honestly curious. And as a writer, yeah, you know, because we're always looking for things that are actable emotions, that are visual externalizations of sort of like, you know, internal, you know, strife and conflict. Yeah. What are some examples, you know, some things that we're looking for as parents, and some things we could use the Storytellers.
So, you know, I'm really, really interested in this question of how do our, you know, yeah, exactly, our internal emotions get expressed kind of physically and kind of come out in that way, which is a very common thing to happen in childhood. So one of the things I'm really interested in are gastrointestinal symptoms and poop in particular. So I'm not entirely sure that you want to feature that in.
I don't know. Kids love poop, right, Justinian?
Fart jokes.
The more the better. So.
Yes, fart jokes. If you
Yes.
if it's starting to feel a little serious, insert a fart joke.
Yeah,
Very true.
Exactly. For some reason, they're just very into those bodily functions, which is great. That's what I study. We have a study where we collect poop from children, and we phrase it as the poop fairy study. So we have a poop fairy who flies over to their house and collects their poop in the nighttime. Hopefully that they haven't left under their pillow.
Hopefully they don't put it under their pillow. That'd be gross.
We're hoping they don't do that. We won't get any more families to our study.
Yeah, but again, I'm not talking about my kids, but if they did, something I should worry about?
I'd be worried about that one in particular.
But yeah. So can you elaborate on the poop study? Because now I'm fascinated. So what is in the poop that again, like you said, is externalizing or exhibiting these sort of like internal conflicts?
Yeah, so I mean, gastrointestinal symptoms are one set of symptoms that lots of children experience. So these kind of unexplainable stomach aches and pains are a really common thing that parents hear from their children. So, sore tummy or a funny feeling in the tummy. And they're a really common reason for children to present at like the primary healthcare physician. So just these chronic abdominal kind of issues.
Mm-hmm.
And, in adults, we know that there's a really strong association between anxiety and gastrointestinal issues. Right. And so there's lots and lots of studies from, many, many decades looking at that association. So in my lab, we've been trying to understand how early in life that manifests. It turns out very early. So, lots of children experience anxiety through gastrointestinal symptoms.
Wow.
And one of the things that we're doing is to try and understand some of the mechanisms behind that. So we take stool samples to look at bacteria that lives inside of the stool, inside of the body, inside of the gut, and to try and understand how that's associated with children's brain development and their emotional functioning. So gastrointestinal symptoms are one, but we look at heart rate as well, sweat response. There are a range of different kind of unusual physical manifestations of anxiety. So I think the most important thing to look for with kids is if the things are unexplainable. If they keep reoccurring and they don't seem to be particularly explained by anything, then it might be a good time to start thinking about some emotional issues that might be causing those types of symptoms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So
poop.
Yeah. So Justinian, poop fairy.
My next. Yeah, I know. Hey, don't tell anybody.
Okay, yeah. So, kid wants to make a lot of money.
Exactly.
That's interesting. Like I had GERD growing up, and I would get heartburn all the time, and it really did psychologically affect me for a long time. That's very interesting. But I never really thought about the psychological effects on it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can sometimes be that the psychological effects cause the symptoms. They may be the chicken, and then what's the chicken? What's hard to determine. But certainly, once those symptoms are in place, so if people have GERD, if people have irritable bowel syndrome or whatever, then stress and psychological turmoil can really exacerbate them. We were seeing a lot of parents talk about that happening to their children during COVID as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So once again, if you're just joining us, this is a live stream of Animation Nation. We're discussing finding hope after loss in in children media. So I think let's open up some questions from our audience. So first question, for kids who have not personally dealt with grief or the loss of a loved one in their life yet, how can we use these projects to build empathy?
Yeah, that's great. I guess I'll dive in and say that, back to what I was saying earlier, even if children haven't experienced loss or grief, it's an emotion that they've explored. Children are very fearful of losing their parents. Children come into their parents' bedroom in the nighttime. Children go through phases where they follow their parents around the house and they're asking them what they're doing all the time. And sometimes that can be, there's a variance in terms of how, normal that is, or how much that is reflecting some really true underlying psychological pain. But certainly these issues are there for children, whether they've experienced grief or loss or not. So I think it's really important to use films like these to explore those issues with children and to then connect it to children and events that these children have had in their lives. So maybe it's their friend has lost a parent, or maybe they've lost a grandparent. That would be, more common for them, I suppose, or even the loss of a pet. So these are
that's huge.
Things,
yeah. And I would say, I think it's okay to nudge them and give them a framework after they've I would say do it probably the second or third viewing, since kids watch it all. So here's a workbook. No, I think about I don't have kids. I don't have kids yet. My parents might try to make it happen at some point. But I have a niece who is like my surrogate little munchkin, and I'm obsessed with her. And about the third or fourth viewing of Moana, I was saying to her, I was like, isn't it great how Moana doesn't need a man? There isn't a man to rescue her, and that there isn't a romantic love interest or any of that, and I just sort of was nudging her in that, being like, look, this young woman was so empowered, and like she kicks ass and she ends up saving the god at the end and everything. She saves the world at the end. And I was like, you don't ever need anyone, a man, to tell you blah, blah, blah. Right. She might, who knows? She might end up being a lesbian. Who knows? But you get my point. Like it's nice to give for me, I think it's helpful to give that framework to kids, and it's sort of like nudge them in that direction where you're like, hey, these are some of the themes that this movie is trying to say. And yeah, it's a good activity, right? It's like watching with purpose. Yeah.
Well, here's a question. So in development, Justinian, how do you balance that against sort of, the need to entertain, the gags, the jokes, the laughs, do you ever think that there's a bridge too far, a line that, okay, no, that's too much. That might
becomes infotainment. There's, I think that line is just something that, development executives, at least, like ones that hopefully know what they're doing, we can straddle that line, because I am very much a big proponent of family entertainment being more than a bunch of loud noises and colors. Those movies make a lot of money, right, for sure, but it's not something that I would personally want to make. And it's I think the reason why, despite the fact that I never expected to end up in family entertainment, the reason why I've done okay is because today's topic's a little serious, but I'm actually just a very immature brat, so just like really tapping into that energy whenever I'm developing is very helpful as well. Yeah, but you're right. It is a fine line. You don't want to be finger wagging at anybody like that. Nobody likes that sort of movie. Not kids, not adults. So yeah, it's something you just sort of learn. There's a little finesse to it for sure.
Yeah. So again, using the example of Over the Moon, was there ever any pushback on, oh my God, the unbreakable chasm of sadness is just too sad? Can we really go that deep, that dark with?
I know.
Is there ever any discussion about it, or do you all recognize that children are sophisticated enough as audiences, and they need that emotion? They need to feel that in order to empathize with these characters and what they're going through. Was there
definitely? Yeah, I think it was definitely the latter, and just just in terms of to take another step back, like that movie came at a time when our company really needed it, and all these magical pieces fell together, and a lot of people took a chance on us, as the young studio that we are, and you sometimes you know, making a movie is like rolling a snowball up a volcano. You know, it's just like, you know, like there's just something, there's truly something magical about the way that Over the Moon came about, that I'm still in awe of it, to be honest. You know, so, you know, I don't think we questioned it. I think we were just like, these emotions are true, these emotions are genuine, and we're gonna go with them. You know.
Nice. All right, let's take another question. Is there any research that shows which age media most impacts children slash adolescents? So, Bridget, I'm going to turn that over to you. Yeah, we might have to bring Yalda back in here for.
Well, Yalda will actually be the best person to answer this. But I'll say that both children and adolescents, so across the entire spectrum, there's lots of evidence that media in different formats. You know, obviously it depends on the age of the child and exactly what developmental stage they're at. But there's lots of data to show that across the developmental spectrum, media plays a really important role. And I mean, media plays a really critical role as adults as well. Like, George, you're talking about the unbreakable chasm of sadness. Like, that's intense, and that's probably affecting you.
No, it was. I was like, I just want to curl up in a fetal ball, you know, in the dark. And so I'm like looking at my kids, going, you know, what are they feeling? Yeah, which is why City's like, was that too much? Because it was really profound for me. So, you know, I can't imagine what, you know, my little kids are going through either. But
and it's hard. Like, maybe they're not affected by it as much as you, because they probably haven't had as much sadness in their life as you have, hopefully, because you're older and you've been through more. And so I think, you know, certainly the things that affect us at different stages of our lives really depend on our memories, our past experiences, but certainly media is really critical for all stages of development. It's a really effective tool at getting messages across. As you know, I'm preaching to the choir here, you obviously know this, but certainly childhood and adolescence is a really prime time for the messages that are in this media to kind of sink in for kids. So
following up on that, so Justinian, Pearl, is there an age range that you try to target, or is it just, you know, project by project basis, or you're just looking at story and, you know?
There's not really, I think it is project to project for sure. You know, I think that there's a timelessness for our first two films where they just feel so classic in some ways, that they're truly family entertainment. You know, I will say that it does seem, to get a little inside baseball again, like it does seem like animation is now starting to trend towards more edgy topics, more edgy content, all of that stuff. And you know, like, you know, we like to grow with the industry and the way the industry is growing. So yeah, I mean, like, but looking at the slate, the one thing about the Pearl slate is that, you know, I think that every project really is its own ecosystem, you know, and there are some that are quite edgy and, you know, potentially might, you know, feel more PG-12, you know, and there are some that are very classic as well, and, you know, are some even potentially even homages to, you know, the stuff that we grew up with. So, you know, like it's a mixed bag, basically. Yeah.
So again, if you're just joining us, this is the live stream of Animation Nation, Finding Hope After Loss in Children's Media. We're here with Bridget Callahan, who's a doctor of developmental psychology at UCLA, and Justinian Huang, who's the head of development at Pearl Studios, who gave us the movies Abominable and Over the Moon. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type them in the comment section, and we will take them. So our next question, are there any special considerations that we should take when developing or writing children's media? Should we even take any special considerations? And I think this goes back to what you were saying, Justinian, about not talking to the audience, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. Just treating them as people, as an audience, period.
Yeah, pretty much. Yes, I would say, yeah. And, you know, also just, I don't know, I like this is just elaborating what I said earlier. You know, you have to try to tell yourself, wow, someone in this audience might be the next Kamala, right? Or, you know, like it's sort of a gift to be given this platform where you're speaking to a generation. adolescents and kids, you know. So just it's something I take very seriously, for sure, and I'm very chuffed that I'm given this opportunity as well, for sure.
So we're
just a kid from San Gabriel Valley.
So what you're saying, there's no fart joke or poop joke quota at Pearl Studios in Valley.
Yeah, pretty much.
There are studios you do have, but just
yeah, you know, but you know, like, one thing is that it seems like there's for a while there, and I'm starting to see it change now, but for a long time, and there was a lot of cynicism in American media in general,
right?
And I feel like now we all just want to hope, and we all just want to heal, and we all just want to, you know, look forward. And I hope that, you know, people in my business will ride that wave, because I personally want to make stuff that is just empowering and hopeful. And, you know, it's you know, like, yes, it's true. Over the Moon is incredibly sad, the in some ways, and but at the same time, I think it's equal parts incredibly soul reviving in a way. You know, like, I think that as Audrey said once, you know, when she was talking about what she thought the thesis of this movie was that, you know, the people we love may not be immortal, but the love we have with them is eternal. And that's beautiful. Like, what a great way to put it, you know, that love, that the way that you love someone is truly eternal. It will go on forever. You know, it's something that just cannot be destroyed. So yeah, that's that's my take on it.
It's a perfect segue to the next question, because those, you know, love, you know, those type of emotions are very universal. But I mean, so how has the response been to the movie from children in different countries? How do they respond to different content, you know, to the content? Even though, you know, there were a lot of you know, like the idea of the mooncakes and the Mooncake Festival. Even though, I'm Chinese, I completely understand what's going on there, but does that affect storytelling in other parts of the world where they're all scratching their heads? Wait, what do they do?
Sure.
You know,
yeah. Well, you know, one thing is, like, you know, like, it's always very useful to. There are certain things that all kids laugh at. They love physical humor, right? They also love seeing the authority figure be shamed a little bit, you know. Like, one of the parts I always laugh at in Over the Moon is when the frog jumps on the goddess's face. It's so funny. It always cracks me up, you know. And it's, you know, I actually just forgot the question. What was it again?
So the idea, like, do children in different countries respond differently to the content? You know, did you find? I
think, honestly, you know, from what I've observed, and I've actually sat in test audiences in multiple countries, I think that kids are. I think that by the time we're adults, we might think we're very different from each other, but honestly, I think that kids everywhere are very similar, you know, and they find the same things hopeful. They find the same things funny. Especially fart jokes, and, you know, like, that's something that's universally funny. So no, I would say some things are a little different, you know. There is in Asian societies, there tends to be a stronger emphasis on the community. And in Western societies, especially America, there tends to be a focus on the individual. So, like, you know, like, there's ways that you can finesse that, you know, a kid in Korea versus a kid in Britain watching a movie can find similar, you know, similar thematic things that really touch them. But obviously, it is, once again, finessing, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So similarly, Bridget, you know, are there, you know, adjustments you have to make in your studies? You know, if you're like looking at, you know, at cases or children who come from different backgrounds, you know, whether it's even different countries or different socioeconomic profiles, or, you know, or is there basic universalities and sort of like grief and loss and trauma, you know, that exhibit the same way?
Yeah, I mean, there's both. You know, just exactly as Justinian said, you know, there are certain universalities, like the parent-child relationship is important in all cultures, everywhere across the world, all across time. That is, you know, something really, really core. I mean, it's core to mammals, not just humans. That, you know, that parent-child relationship is really critical. So, you know, that's one of the reasons I study it, is because it really cuts across cultures. But, you know, we do need to be really careful in the lab in terms of the questions that we ask and the way that we study the parent-child relationship. You know, how parents care for their children looks very different across cultures. And so it's important, you know, being a Westerner, to not bring that Western, you know, perspective to everything that we do, and to not say like, this is what a, you know, a really caring, sensitive parent looks like. And then like, well, no, none of these other cultures are doing that same thing, because of course, you know, there's huge variability in what that looks like and how parents show their care. And it's
Totally.
certainly not always looking the same way. So I think it's really great to have cross studios and these portrayals that are really very clear portrayals of children in different cultures, and that American kids, Australian kids, you know, people in different parts of the world can see how, you know, grief is experienced in different ways across cultures. They can understand what mooncakes are and learn about the goddess, and, you know, those are really critical things. So I think it's really fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah.
So I should not ask the follow-up questions of which culture wins? Who are the best parents? Two Chinese. So, all right. Next question. Do you think kids today are smarter consumers of media and film, being digital natives? Does this change how you have to develop stories? Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because, yeah, I know, you know, my kids have probably consumed more content at the age of 5 than I had by the time I was crazy. So yeah, they've seen so much more stuff than, you know, I ever was able to watch as a kid. So yeah. How does, you know, Bridget, how's that? Are you saying, does that affect their development? You know, and, you know, Justinian, do you have to make adjustments knowing, oh, well, yeah, they've probably watched all the Disney stuff. They know these tropes, you know, do we have to be fresh, you know? Yeah.
I'll throw it to Justinian first.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, I would say that obviously, I mean, like, we always want to, in many ways, most of, like, I don't want to say every animated movie has been told before, like, but, you know, like, I think the idea of the freshness part of it, which I'll talk about, is that I feel like it's a matter of, for me, I think the way you can be fresh is that you talk head on, eye to eye with a young audience, that you don't talk down to them, and also that you keep your values current. You know, like, there are movies that we all grew up, there are movies we all grew up with as children, where, you know, maybe the messaging isn't entirely empowering. You know, you think about older movies where, you know, like, it's the protagonist is very unapproachable, you know, like, because they're royalty. You know, like, I think at Pearl, what we really wanted to do with our movies was create a new brand of quote unquote princess. The thing, of course, is that Yi and Fei Fei, our protagonists in our movies, neither of them are royalty. You know, they're instead incredibly strong-willed, independent, remarkable young women, you know, and I feel like that's how you keep it fresh. Because actually, if you go back 10, 15 years, that wasn't always the case for a lot of these in this genre of media. Yeah.
Nope, that's true.
Yeah, I agree, and I feel like, you know, certainly the things that I grew up on were super limited, and I think children are much more discerning consumers now, and they want to see themselves represented on film. They want to hear stories that are varied and different, and so, you know, while some of the themes that are coming up might be the same, whether it's parental loss or triumph in some way, that the ways that those stories are told and the people who are included in the telling of those stories varies across the movies. And I think that's really important. And if we don't do that, then kids are going to stop watching.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So unfortunately, we are nearly out of time. So we'll just end with one last question. So personally, for each of you, what were your favorite movies as kids? And do you think those movies affected, sort of your worldview as an adult? Were they important in your development as the person you are now?
Yeah. I'll dive in because
Yes,
as soon as that question comes up, I know exactly what it is. And mine was Fern Gully.
The last Shrek.
I love Fern Gully.
Mhm.
Loved that movie, and I remember seeing it. It had such a strong impact on me because you remember where you were when you first saw it, and some of the conversations that you had with your friends afterwards. So I was at my school, and we were in the library. It must have been a rainy day, and we were shown the film, and I loved it, and it had a huge impact on me. I still. Anytime my husband is brushing his teeth and he leaves the tap on, I rush in there and turn the tap off. And I'm like, and every time I do that, I think of Fern Gully. And, I think those are really important messages to give to kids. So that's mine. I'm interested in hearing what yours is, Justinian.
I loved The Goonies. That was my favorite. I love The Goonies, obviously because there was representation. Short Round from Indiana Jones was in it, which was awesome. But I also I don't know. I love adventure movies with crazy set pieces. What can I say? I still do. Yeah, for sure. And probably a second place to choose an animated movie. I always loved The Fox and the Hound because I was a very emo kid, and that's one of the few animated movies that doesn't sugarcoat the ending, and it had a very profound, beautiful ending where they don't end up being best friends. They end up, accepting who they are and parting ways. And it was, but still at the end, he saves his life. And yeah, it's just, I still get goosebumps about it. I love that movie. And yeah, for sure. Now you see why I developed movies like Over the Moon, George.
All right. Makes it, it makes a cause effect there that you can trace. So. Nice. So, all right. Well, sadly, we are out of time. So I'm going to bring Michelle back up for some final last words. Oh, Michelle, you're muted. Got to turn on. There you go.
Haha. Thank you for that great conversation. I learned so much, and I wish we could keep going so that I could listen to you all night. But I just really want to thank everyone for attending. I want to thank the Center for Scholars and Storytellers and Dr. Yalda T Wills, Pearl Studio and Justinian Huang, Professor George Huang, Dr. Bridget Callahan, behind the scenes, my right hand, Jess Ju, as well as Jenna Signorelli from Center for Scholars and Storytellers. We also have a survey, if you could please fill that out. That helps with our grants, and that also just helps keep programs like this free. Also, if you are willing, I know that if you're willing and able, yesterday was Giving Tuesday. If you are able to donate to both CAPE and the Center for Scholars and Storytellers, we have the information down below. And George, CAPE is no longer a membership organization, so there are no dues. So you're off there.
Yay! I'll still write a check, though. I'll cut a check tonight.
so appreciate your participation today, all of you, and thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great holiday season, and until next time.
All right. Thank you very much.